Hello, Namaste everyone. Again, welcome back to this session of NEET. Very important points are being given in these kinds of sessions. And in this session, I am going to talk about the molecular basis of inheritance. Molecular basis of inheritance. What do you mean by molecular basis of inheritance? In the other session, I had told you about the principles of inheritance and variation, where we had talked about the reasons for inheritance and the factors responsible for inheritance. All those things, issues we had studied. The same thing we are continuing here at the molecular level, at the micro level, at the core level, genetic level. What actually is happening, or what actually will happen, so that inheritance takes place. Okay, so this is a very important chapter. With reference to your NEET or any competitive exams, molecular biology, molecular basis of inheritance plays a very important role. You refer any question paper, you will definitely find maximum number of questions appearing from this particular chapter. Okay, so be thorough on these on the various aspects of this chapter, and let me start from here. Actually, it has been very well established that the major reasons, causal factors or the factors which actually cause the inheritance and which are actually responsible for variation are the macromolecules called nucleic acids. Nucleic acids. So in this chapter we are going to talk in detail about nucleic acids, right? So basically, what are nucleic acids? Basically, nucleic acids are the macromolecules having the acidic property that are associated with nucleus of the cell. Okay, they are the biological macromolecules with acidic property associated with nucleus. So nucleus refers to nucleic, acidic property brings in acids. So nucleic acids, and this acidic property is because of phosphoric acid. So phosphate is associated with this molecule, hence called nucleic acid. And who discovered these nucleic acids? In the beginning, the nucleic acids were identified by a scientist called Friedrich Mischer. Okay, Friedrich Mischer identified this particular macromolecule, and initially he named them as nuclein. He named them as nuclein, and he found this and he observed this in the blood, RBCs. In the RBCs, he could find these macromolecules which were named as nuclein. But later, the scientist called Altman. Later, the scientist called Altman renamed them as nucleic acids. So I repeat, the macromolecules, these nucleic acids were initially observed by Mischer in the blood sample and later named as nuclein, which were renamed later by a scientist called Altman. And gradually, lots of investigations took place in this field and found that there are two types of nucleic acids, namely DNA and RNA. All the organisms in this entire world are definitely having these molecules, DNA and RNA. Today, this DNA particularly is considered as the genetic material of organisms. Okay. Now, what are these nucleic acids basically made of? There are three components nucleic acids are made of. They are the nitrogenous bases, the sugar and the phosphoric acid. Okay, nitrogenous bases, sugar and phosphoric acids, or phosphate. Nitrogenous bases are basically two types. They are purines, pyrimidines. Nitrogenous bases are of two types, purines and pyrimidines. What is the difference among the two? The purines are double ringed structure. Pyrimidines are single ringed structures. Purines have a benzene ring and an imidazole ring. So this is benzene ring, you know, it is a 6 carbon compound. Imidazole ring is a 5 carbon compound. But this has got only one benzene ring. Only one benzene ring. So that is the basic difference between purines and pyrimidines. And these purines are two. They are adenine and guanine. Pyrimidines are three. Thymine, cytosine, and uracil. Thymine, cytosine and uracil. These are the three pyrimidines. These are the two purines. So we have purines and pyrimidines, nitrogenous bases, and we have sugar. Sugar is always a pentose sugar. Sugar is always a pentose sugar, and there is a phosphate molecule. Hence, these are the basic components of any nucleic acid. And we have already mentioned there are two major types of nucleic acids, DNA and RNA. Let us study them each one by one separately. To begin with, the DNA molecule. What is DNA molecule? DNA is nothing but deoxyribonucleic acid. Deoxyribonucleic acid. So DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, and this nucleic acid, this DNA is the genetic material in all the organisms. It is the genetic material in all the organisms, starting from the most primitive unicellular organisms to highly advanced multicellular organisms. And it is a genetic material because it decides the character of the organism. It is responsible for the inheritance and variation of the organisms. And this DNA is again made of three components. Which are they? Basically, the nitrogenous bases like adenine, guanine, thymine and cytosine. Sugar, the pentose sugar called deoxyribose, and the phosphate molecule or phosphoric acid. So these are the three components in a DNA molecule. And how these are associated among each other? Always the base, the sugar combines with the base and produces a unit called nucleoside. Okay, it forms a unit called nucleoside, and this nucleoside is formed by N-glycosidic bond. It is formed by N-glycosidic bond. For example, the sugar is deoxyribose. It combines with the base. Base is, say for example, adenine, and this forms a nucleoside called deoxyadenosine. See, deoxyadenosine is one nucleoside. Similarly, it can combine with guanine and forms deoxyguanosine. Similarly, it can combine with cytosine and forms what is called deoxycytidine. It can also combine with thymine. It can form deoxythymidine. Now you have 4 nucleosides: deoxyadenosine, deoxyguanosine, deoxythymidine, and deoxycytidine. The 4 nucleosides of a DNA molecule. Now it is still incomplete. It can become complete or it can get completed only when it combines with the phosphate molecule. So nucleoside with the phosphate produces what is called nucleotide. It produces the nucleotide. So this nucleotide is very important. It is the building block of a DNA polymer. Okay, because DNA is a complex structure, so individual block, individual unit, individual member of this complex molecule will be nucleotide. So when deoxyadenosine combines with phosphate, it produces deoxyadenosine monophosphate, DAMP, deoxyadenosine monophosphate. Similarly, with the deoxyguanosine, it produces deoxyguanosine monophosphate. With deoxycytidine, it forms deoxycytidine monophosphate. Similarly, with the deoxythymidine, it forms a deoxythymidine monophosphate. Deoxyadenilic acid, deoxyguanilic acid, deoxycytidilic acid, deoxythymidilic acid. That also is another name. That's another way of naming this. So DAMP, DGMP, DCMP, DTMP. Each is considered as a nucleotide. So there we have 4 nucleotides. Okay, we have 4 nucleotides, and each becomes the building block of a polynucleotide strand. Now, how this nucleoside will combine with the phosphate molecule? It is by phosphoester bond. It is by phosphoester bond. So in a nucleotide, there will be 2 types of bonds. One is N-glycosidic bond, other is the phosphoester bond. Got it? Now we have so many individual nucleotides. All these nucleotides have to be linked to each other. And how that linkage takes place? That linkage takes place by a very specific manner. That is, see, DAMP is one nucleotide and it has to be combined with another nucleotide, say for example DCMP. Now these two have to be joined, linked. Okay, how the linkage takes place? This linkage is always between the 3rd carbon atom of one nucleotide with the 5th carbon atom of the other nucleotide through phosphate molecule. Got it? 3rd carbon atom of one nucleotide with the 5th carbon atom of another nucleotide through phosphate molecule by forming a bond called phosphodiester bond. It is by phosphodiester bond. Let me write here. Say, this is the sugar molecule, 1st carbon, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and this is the 5th carbon. Now this is sugar molecule. Now it combines with the base. Now this becomes nucleoside, deoxyadenosine. At the 1st carbon atom, the base is attached. And it becomes nucleotide when it combines with a phosphate molecule. Phosphate always attaches at the 3rd carbon atom. Now this becomes DAMP. Okay, DAMP. Now this combines with the another nucleotide. How? By 3-5- ratio. Now this is the bond. This is the fifth carbon atom, right? Look at this. Look at this. Now you can see the formation of this. You see, this is fifth carbon atom. This is fourth, third, second, first. Here again there is a phosphate molecule. Now look at this is one nucleotide. This is another nucleotide which have been combined together from 3' to 5' end with the help of a phosphodiester bond. So this is very, very important. Thus, a nucleotide strand will be produced. Now you go on linking like this and you will get a long thread, that is the, see, DAMP, DTMP, DGMP, DGMP, like this. You go on linking the nucleotides. You will get a long thread of polynucleotide strand, which is also called polymer. This is one nucleotide. There is another nucleotide. When combined, we obtain the polynucleotide strand. Or this is one monomer, another monomer. When all the monomers are linked together, it forms a long polymer. Got it? So one thread of DNA molecule strand, one DNA strand will have 3 bonds: N-glycosidic bond, the phosphoester bond, phosphodiester bond. 3 bonds will be there. And now look at this. Now this adenine is a purine. So how the purine is present? Purine is having 2 bonds, alva, 2 rings, alva. Ivaga nodi, see, this is one purine. This is one purine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 nitrogen atoms are there. Now how the linkage takes place? Linkage between purine and sugar in such a way that, see, this is N9, nitrogen atom at the 9th position. So in a purine molecule, the bond occurs between the 9th nitrogen atom and the first carbon atom. I repeat, 9th nitrogen atom of the purine with the first carbon atom of the sugar to make a N-glycosidic bond. So this is N-glycosidic bond. Suppose it is a pyrimidine. Suppose it is a pyrimidine. See, this is just a pyrimidine. This is just a pyrimidine. Now how, see, this is C is pyrimidine. Now how it takes place? It takes place between the second carbon atom and the first carbon atom. This with this. Second nitrogen atom of the pyrimidine with the first carbon atom of the sugar, thus producing a this way. This is N-glycosidic bond. So please remember this. The N-glycosidic bond in case of purines is between the 9th nitrogen atom and first carbon atom. In case of pyrimidine, it is between the second nitrogen atom and the first carbon atom. Okay, so that is what you must remember thoroughly. Next, always, now look at this. This is one way. Second, this distance in a thread, distance between the first sugar and the next sugar is always 11.1 angstroms. Distance between the first sugar and the second sugar is always 11.1 angstrom units, right? And the yeah, that's it. Now we have a DNA strand. Now we have a DNA strand. Okay. Now how the DNA molecule is produced? Because DNA molecule is double stranded. How it is produced? It is produced by, see, this is one polynucleotide strand, this is another polynucleotide strand. Now these two strands will combine to each other with the help of a hydrogen bond. See, this is hydrogen bond between the two polynucleotide strands. How that I will tell you later. Now this length of this hydrogen bond is always 2.8 to 3 angstrom units. 2.8 to 3 angstrom units. Next, the detailed study of detailed structure of DNA was studied by the Franklin and Wilkins. By a method called X-ray crystallography. Okay, by a method called X-ray crystallography, Franklin and Wilkins studied the structure of DNA molecule, and which was elaborated by, proposed in the form of a model by Crick, Watson and Crick. Watson and Crick proposed the double helix model of DNA by referring to this. By referring to this study, Watson and Crick proposed the double helix model of DNA, which very comprehensively explained the structure of DNA molecule. That's why all these four scientists were together awarded the Nobel Prize for such a tremendous work. Now let's see in brief the double helix model of DNA. The DNA double helix model says that each DNA molecule is made of two strands like this, and they are helically coiled. That's why it is called double helix. And the double helix DNA is compared to a ladder with a backbone and the step. This backbone is made up of repeated units of phosphate and sugar, and this step is made up of the base pairs, nitrogenous base pairs. How the nitrogenous base pairing takes place? It is by a complementary base pairing, wherein the purine of one strand always pairs up with the pyrimidine of the other strand. Particularly adenine of one strand always pairs up with the thymine of the other strand with the help of a double bond. Guanine of one will always pair with the cytosine with the help of triple bond. Say, a double hydrogen bond between AT, a triple hydrogen bond between GC. So now you call this as one base pair, this is as another base pair. Understood? So this is very, very important, complementary base pairing. Why? Because you may be given a number of base pairs in a DNA molecule and may be asked to identify the number of hydrogen bonds present. So in that case, you must remember this. And based on this complementary base pairing, we have a base equivalence rule. Okay, base equivalence rule. And that rule says that the number of purines on the one strand is always equivalent to the number of pyrimidines on the other strand. Okay, I repeat, the number of purines on one strand is always equivalent to number of pyrimidines on the other strand. This is the base equivalence rule, Chargaff's base equivalence rule. And the model also says that the linkage between the hydrogen bonding or phosphate athava 3-5' linkage between the nucleotides, 3-5' linkage between the nucleotides will cause the coiling of the DNA. This is important. 3-5' linkage of the nucleotides is responsible for the coiling of DNA, and coiling will produce this kind of grooves like this, it produces this kind of grooves, so that now this groove is called major groove and this groove is called minor groove. Major groove and minor groove. One. Secondly, the hydrogen bonding between the two strands will cause the anti-parallel arrangement of the strands. What is that anti-parallel? If one strand runs from 3' to 5', the other strand runs from 5' to 3'. This is anti-parallel arrangement of the two strands. It is because of the hydrogen bonding between the two strands. Got it? And also, due to the 3' 5' linkage between the successive nucleotides, the distance between the two nucleotides is always 3.4 angstroms and angle is always 36 degrees. Okay, distance between the two nucleotides is 3.4 angstroms and the angle of turn is always 36 degrees. So, one turn of DNA molecule will have 10 base pairs. One turn of DNA will have 10 base pairs. So, the length of one turn of DNA molecule is always 34 angstroms and it always for every 360 degrees. Right? So, this is in general the double helix model of DNA, which has been universally accepted. And please remember, this DNA represents B DNA. The type of DNA which has been explained by Watson Crick and studied by Wilkins and Franklin is this B DNA, because there are 5 types of DNAs being proposed. They are A DNA, B DNA, C DNA, D DNA and Z DNA, of which actual DNA is this. Other 4 are experimental DNA structures. Okay, and there are lots of differences between each of these with respect to many things: the number of base pairs per turn, angle of turn, then the distance between the two sugars, or the length of the hydrogen bond. So many differences are there, and this is clockwise. The turn of these DNAs is clockwise. This is anti-clockwise. This is also called, these A, B, C, D types of DNAs show right-handed coiling. This shows left-handed coiling. Z DNA shows left-handed coiling. The other 4 DNAs show right-handed coiling. And particularly the one explained by Watson Crick is this B DNA. Please remember this. So now it is clear that the DNA molecule is a long thread. Imagine this is a cell, this is a nucleus. In this tiny nucleus, the long threads of DNAs have to be packed. You imagine our own case. In our each cell, there will be 46 chromosomes. In every nucleus of our cells, the number of chromosomes are present is 46. How all these 46 have to be packed within such a tiny nucleus, because cell itself is micro, nucleus is further micro, inside that so many numbers of chromosomes have to be packed. How it happens? So that is done by, or that is explained by a model called nucleosome model. Nucleosome model. What is a nucleosome? Nucleosome is a combination of DNA plus associated histone octamer. Associated histone octamer. So what is a nucleosome? It is the DNA with the histone octamer. It's called the nucleosome. And what is that histone octamer? Histone octamer is a complex of 8 proteins, histone proteins, like this. Like this. Which are those proteins? They are H2A, H2B, H3 and H4. Each protein molecule is present in pairs like this. So now pair of each making it 8. This now is called histone octamer. Now around this histone octamer the DNA will coil like this, and this DNA takes 1/3/4 turn around each octamer. Okay, the length of DNA is always 1/3/4 turn, and it is always it will have a length of 146 base pairs. 146 base pairs. Got it? So from the time of from the point it enters the octamer to the point it leaves the octamer, length is 146 base pairs, because the size of the DNA is always determined by the number of base pairs, or length of the DNA is always determined by the length of the number of the base pairs. So this is the length plus. Now this is another octamer with the DNA like this. Now in between these two successive octamers there is a small length of DNA. This small length of DNA is called linker DNA. The length of this linker DNA is approximately 60 base pairs, and this linker DNA is always associated with another histone called H1 protein. Okay, H1 protein. Now you go on joining like this. When the DNA thread wraps around each octamer, to that extent the length decreases. So that is how it gets packed very comfortably in each of the nucleus. So now what happens is that you just compress this. Now this piles upon this. So in that way, if say for example, if I draw here, like this, if it becomes, say this represent the octamers, many octamers coming together, here loosely arranged chromosome. So now you call this loosely arranged part of the chromosome as euchromatin, and this tightly arranged part of the chromosome is called heterochromatin. Euchromatin and heterochromatin. Now what is the difference between the two? Euchromatin is the region on the chromosome where the chromosomes are arranged loosely. In the heterochromatin region, chromosomes are arranged very tightly. Because of the tight arrangement, replication is slow. So protein synthesis gets slowed down. Because of the loose arrangement, replication becomes fast. They are very active. And because of the close arrangement, these are dark in color, here these are light in color. Okay, so such many differences are there. So these are the histone proteins, but chromosomes will also have some more proteins for extra stability, which are called non-histone proteins. So these are some of the major details of the DNA structure. Okay, now moving ahead. Now we are very much clear with the structure of the DNA molecule, and now it has already been confirmed that DNA is the genetic material. But how to believe it? Can we accept that DNA is a genetic material? Because we are all science students. Science doesn't accept anything without proof. So we need proof. So for the fact that DNA is a genetic material, we have been lots of experiments have been done. But there are three major experiments which are there in the syllabus. They are the one, Griffith's experiment. Avery, MacLeod and McCarthy experiment, and Hershey and Chase experiment. So three experiments have been given to prove that the DNA is the genetic material. So what have they done? So Griffith has done a very basic experiment. Actually, he was doing experiments on the pneumonia pathogens, that is the Streptococcus pneumoniae. So he was actually culturing the Streptococcus pneumoniae on a culture medium. And for his surprise, he could see the very shiny colony at one place, very dull colonies at another place. Shining colonies, dull colonies. So on this culture medium, he could see two types of colonies. And when further investigated, found that this colony was having some property and this colony was having some other property. Hence, these cells were called S strain cells and these were called R strain cells. So shining were S, non-shining were R. S refers to smooth strain, R refers to rough strain. Why? Because this S strain bacterium had a capsule layer around it like this. But this R strain did not have that capsule. So it was naked. So rough, this was smooth. And it was also found that this S strain bacterium was highly virulent. This was avirulent. What is that? Virulent means which is pathogenic, which readily causes the disease, highly active. Avirulent means inactive, which doesn't cause the diseases. It is quite safe one. So using these two strains, Griffith conducted many trials on different samples of mice. What he did was, he collected one sample of mice and he treated that with the S strain bacterium and found that the mice being dead. And the other sample, another sample of mice were taken and R strain were injected and found that the mice being alive. So now this shows that the S strain is dangerous, R strain is not dangerous. These mice died because of pneumonia. R strain is avirulent, non-pathogenic, hence it did not cause any pneumonia among these mice. And in the third trial, he collected another sample of mice and injected that sample with the heat-killed S strain, and for his surprise, now mice did not die, they remained alive. Why heat killed? So they could not cause any disease. And later in the fourth trial, to one more sample of mice, he injected a mixture of R strain plus heat killed S strain. Okay, R strain and a mixture of heat killed S strain to another set of mice and found that the mice being dead. Why mice died in this case? So he extracted the blood sample from this mice and examined under the microscope, and for his surprise, he found only S strain in the blood sample. Absolutely there were no R strain. Actually he had injected R, but at the end there were no R. So what he concluded was, in the bacteria, in the mice, this R strain must have been transformed into S strain, and proposed that there is some transforming principle involved. There is some transforming principle involved which has caused the death of mice. Hope you are clear now. So this is one. So he could not give any conclusion regarding the genetic nature of the DNA, but just concluded this. But the same was continued by Avery and Co. Avery, McLeod and McCarthy, who gave a biochemical proof, and this biochemical proof, what they did was, they extracted the blood sample. Okay, I will rub it here. So what they did was, they extracted the blood sample from the dead mice in the 4th trial of Griffith's experiment, and that blood sample was purified. That blood sample was purified. So that purified sample was divided into 3 subsamples. Okay. I repeat, from the dead mice of the 4th trial in the Griffith's experiment, blood was isolated, purified, divided into 3 subsamples, and to the first subsample, the enzymes were added. To this, protease were added. Okay, then this mixture was injected to one set of mice, and to this second subsample he added RNAs, again injected to one more set of mice. To the third subsample they added DNAs and injected to another set of mice, right, and found that here in this case mice died. In this case also mice died, but in this case mice did not die. Mice did not die. Why? Why in this case mice did not die? Let me tell you. See, the purified sample had 3 components. They are proteins, RNAs and DNAs. Only 3 chemicals were there in the purified sample: proteins, RNA and DNA. Now, when the first subsample with these 3 components was treated with the protease, the proteins got denatured. RNA and DNA were present. Right, RNA and DNA were present. Second subsample was treated with RNAs, so RNA was denatured. So this sample had protein and DNA. Third subsample was treated with DNAs, so DNA was denatured, and in this case the animal had only protein and RNA. So you now ignore this because here the mice were alive. Now consider these 2 cases where mice were dead. What has happened? Which must have killed the mice? See, in this case RNA DNA, in this case protein DNA. Now which is the common component in both? It was DNA. DNA was the common component in both. Hence, they concluded that the biochemical involved in the death of the mice was DNA. In this case, mice remained alive because DNA was not there. Thus, they finally concluded that the biochemical, the transforming principle which was named by Griffith is nothing but DNA. So DNA was considered to be the genetic material. But this was perfectly proved further by another scientist. That scientist, they are Hershey and Chase. Hershey and Chase, who gave a unequivocal proof. He gave a unequivocal proof for the fact that DNA is the genetic material. How did they do? See, they used Escherichia coli cells and phages, plus they used culture medium and also radioactive components. So initially what they did was, they introduced the phages into two culture media. One culture medium with radioactive sulfur, the other culture medium with radioactive phosphorus. And later they found that the new phages produced in the culture medium, radioactive sulfur medium, was having, look at this, the new phage produced in the radioactive sulfur medium had the radioactive capsid normal DNA. Why radioactive capsid? Capsid is, a phage is a virus. The capsid of the virus is made of protein. Protein is having sulfur. So protein component was having radioactive sulfur, that's why capsid was radioactive. Now the new phage produced in the radioactive sulfur medium had a normal capsid and a radioactive DNA, because DNA is having phosphate or phosphorus. This is one stage. Next stage what he did was, he infected two bacterial cells, E. coli cells. He infected two bacterial cells with each of these phages, and later found that inside each bacterial cell these phages multiply. Each of these phages multiplied in each of the cells and found that, look at this now. Now make the difference, observe the difference. In both the bacterial cells, both the phages have multiplied. But look at this. In this cell, the capsid and DNA both are normal. But parental phage had radioactive capsid. Daughter phage has normal capsid. I repeat, parental phage had radioactive capsid. Daughter phage has normal capsid. Look at this. The parental phage has radioactive DNA. Now the daughter phages also have radioactive DNAs. Means what? The protein has not been transferred to daughters. Proteins of the parents have not transferred to the daughters. Only DNA of the parents have got transferred into the daughters. So by this, Hershey and Chase concluded that it is DNA which is transferred from one generation to another generation, not protein or any other biochemical. Hagadrinda, even you consider any species, when we born, what we get from our parents? We get only genetic material. We don't get this. Initially, when the zygote is produced, imagine yourself in a zygotic stage. Zygote had only DNA material which were given by parents. All these are produced later. Okay. Hence, it is proved that DNA is the genetic material. Okay. Now, it is perfectly known that DNA is the genetic material. Now, what are the properties of a genetic material? What are the properties of a genetic material? Properties of genetic material is that it should be able to replicate itself, it should be able to mutate itself, it should be able to remain stable, and it should always follow Mendelian principles. You should always follow Mendelian principles. These are the properties of the genetic material. If you want protein to be a genetic material, that protein must have all these properties. If you want the lipid to be a genetic material, it should have this. But fortunately or unfortunately, none of these follow all the four except DNA. Even RNA also doesn't follow this, because RNA is not stable. RNA is not stable. Why RNA is not stable? RNA is not stable. It is highly reactive. Why? Because the second carbon atom has got a hydroxyl group. Second carbon of ribose sugar has got hydroxyl group, and also it has got uracil. Okay, uracil. Because of these two reasons, the RNA is not stable. It is highly reactive, so it cannot act as a genetic material. But in case of DNA, the second carbon atom has got only hydrogen component. See, DNA has hydrogen, RNA has got hydroxyl. That is why DNA is stable, RNA is not stable. And instead of uracil, DNA has got thymine. Thymine is also a stable component, stable nuclear nitrogenous base. So these are the reasons why DNA is the genetic material for all these properties. And a DNA, the genetic material must have the following functions as well. Which are the functions? The functions are, they should be able to replicate themselves. They should be able to produce the RNA, or they undergo replication. The functions of DNA, they undergo replication, they undergo transcription by producing RNA, they produce proteins, and also they carry out mutation. So these are the four major functions of a DNA molecule: replication, transcription, translation, mutation. Is that okay? And along with this, DNA follows a pattern called central dogma. DNA follows a pattern called central dogma, and this central dogma concept was proposed by Crick. Concept of central dogma was proposed by Crick. It says that, what is a central dogma? It is a pathway, or it is the flow of what? Flow of information. From where? From DNA to proteins. From DNA to proteins. So that is called central dogma. And this pathway can be represented as follows. Now DNA is there. DNA undergoes, it produces RNA. RNA produces proteins. And the process where the DNA produces RNA is called transcription. Transcription. The process where the RNA produces proteins is called translation. It's called translation. Got it? So, central dogma mainly involves two steps: transcription and translation. Hence, what we must understand is that never the proteins are produced directly from DNA. DNA will act only through RNAs. Is that okay? So, any protein in our system is produced through the formation of RNA. That occurs by a process called transcription, and this is called translation or protein biosynthesis. Sometimes the RNA can produce DNA, and this process is called reverse transcription. The process is called reverse transcription. What is reverse transcription? Process where the DNA is obtained from RNA. Transcription is forward process. Reverse transcription is a reverse process, backward process. Now, and this reverse transcription is also called teminism. Reverse transcription is also called teminism, and it is called teminism because this was discovered by two scientists like Temin and Baltimore. Temin and Baltimore. Is that okay? Is that fine? Hence, the central dogma is this. Please remember. So, in the organisms, the replication, transcription, I will take it to the next section. Replication, transcription, translation, all will vary from prokaryotes to eukaryotes, because type of enzymes, the number of enzymes involved will be very different, the pattern in which this process occur will be different, and so there are many differences as such from prokaryotes to eukaryotes. Understood? So I'll stop this session here, and I'll take up the other aspects in the next session. Right? Thank you.